and I'm more than thrilled to have you here in 5 Minute BI. And it's enough of me, 5 Minute BI with Melissa de Korte.
Thank you, Mari. So thank you so much for inviting me and for having me here. So I want to talk to you about parameters. So the first thing that I want to tell you is that you can actually modify a parameter value from outside the Power Query editor. So from inside desktop, for example, you can click that transform data dropdown, and you can edit your parameters here. And something similar happens in the Power BI service, where you can go to the settings of your data model, and you can manage your parameters there as well. As you can see, I've already set two parameters up. One is called file location. It just contains a string to a file, and the other is a sales channel, which is a list of values, right, that I can select from. Now, I won't do anything here, so I'll cancel that out, and we'll head over to the Power Query editor. Because, well, I think it's a part of life, right? Things change, and the same happens to file names and file locations. It seems like data is always on the move. And when you use a connector, any of the connectors basically in the Power Query editor, the connection string is always hard-coded. So it's a best practice to replace that hard-coded string with a parameter. So here's how you do that. You go to your query, and then you go back to the source tab. And there in red, you can see the connection string. Now, this resembles the thing that we already saw, right? Because I prepared that file location parameter here, and it had the same string. So I can remove or replace this hard-coded string by my parameter value by just referring to its name. So that's file location. I'll just use my cursor keys and highlight it, press tab to select it, and hit that check mark. So nothing changes. That's good, because that means that I didn't break my query. Everything is working as it should. Awesome. Now, the other thing that you can do with parameters is create a subset of your data. So when you're developing a model and you're developing a report and measures and whatnot, right, you might not always need all of your data. So to speed up development, you can create a subset using filters, right? And I'll select this sales query. And I started that process by just creating a regular filter. So I hit that drop-down box here in the channel column, and I selected a single value. Now, because I already did that, there's only one value there, and we can see that inside the formula bar as well. It says my channel needs to be equal to export. And again, this is a string we can sell because it's in red in a set of quotes. So we can replace this string by my other parameter that we saw previously called sales channel, right? So if I do that, sales channel, and confirm that, nothing changes, because if I select that, it has the same value there. But here's
the default value is export in the
I've set the value to export, but we'll take a look at my parameters in a minute. So when I X out this regular filter step, I'm going to show you a trick how you can revert back to showing all of your data again by making your parameter optional and by writing a simple if statement. And that's what we're seeing in the screen right here. So this is basically the expression that we saw earlier. Channel needs to be equal to whatever string I have inside my parameter, but I've added some logic to it. So because an optional parameter doesn't have any value, if you remove it, then it will be equal to null. So if my parameter value is null, then I'm returning a true, meaning show all of the rows in my table. And if that's not the case, then use whatever value I've selected inside my parameter, right? Filtering my table and creating that subset that I need for development. So if you can do all those amazing
Awesome.
things,
It's a cool.
yeah.
It's great.
So if you can do
Yeah.
all those amazing things, then setting up a parameter must be really difficult, right? Let's take a look. So
Yeah.
I'll hit Manage Parameters on the ribbon here. And this is all you
Uh huh.
need to manage all of the parameters within your file, right? You can delete them by pressing that X. You can
Uh-huh.
create new ones by pressing New. And all that you have to do for each parameter is provide it a name. Now, I purposefully omitted spaces because then I
Uh-huh.
don't have to use that hash quote notation when I call my query, because a
Uh-huh.
parameter is just a query like any other query in your file. You can provide it a description.
Yeah.
By default, all of your parameters will be checked as required, meaning that you need to specify a value.
Require.
All of the parameters that we've
Uh-huh.
created were strings, right? We had a file location string.
Yeah.
We had a text string that needed to be equal to whatever was export,
Export
indeed, yeah,
was
to a
string.
column
Yeah.
value. So the text or the type that,
And the channels was a
yeah,
string too.
so the type that we needed to select was text as well. And then you have a couple of options, right? You
Uh-huh.
can specify a single value, like I did for my file location parameter.
Yeah.
You can choose a list of values. That means that you can basically create your own list within your file with different values. Now, that can be really useful when you're
Uh-huh.
sharing a file with another user who maybe stores their data file
Uh-huh.
on their local hard drive, right? So that may be in a different folder than where
Uh-huh.
I have that file stored. And finally, you can choose a query. Now, I've done so for the sales channel, right? I've selected a query here, and the query is
Uh-huh.
called channels. And as you can see here, that's just a list of values. So all of the different values, all of the different
Yeah.
channels are stored within that list. And that made it possible for me
Mm-hmm.
to have that drop down in the front end, if you remember, that we saw that earlier, right? So when I
Yeah.
now remove export here, again, required is unchecked. That's important. I won't get an error, right? So there we go.
Uh-huh.
Let's go back. We now see all of the data.
Oh. Yeah. All the
All the
channels are
channels are
here.
there. Exactly. So we have distributor, export, and wholesale. Those are just the values that are in this file. And if I blank out my parameter, I get all of the values back. And if I
All
Yep.
the
And
data.
if I want to work on a subset of my data, I just specify a single value and my table will be filtered. So
We can call it a dynamic filtering the raw data. Yeah.
exactly, yeah,
It's a good name for our episode, you know? Dynamic filtering via the Power Query.
exactly. Parameters store values and
Yeah.
those values can be used as inputs. But because you can modify their value from either desktop, the Power BI servers, or from the Power Query editor, right? It makes it dynamic. You can even build
Uh-huh.
functions using parameters. But that's a story for another time.
Yeah.